This tutorial is going to cover the steps in Photoshop of how to isolate a key image and a halftone dot pattern and a flat or silhouette from a photographic image. Now, those three words, halftone pattern, key image, and flat, are actually the language of a printmaking technique that you may or may not be familiar with, but it's from the comic book industry. So let's kind of zoom in on a couple of these imagery, some of this imagery, and get a little closer look at what's actually happening to kind of bring this stuff to life. So take a look at the black outlines, these hard black outlines that were actually hand rendered by an artist at one point. Now, in order to bring those black outlines to life, all these colors get laid in. We'll take a close look at some of these colors. They're not image flats. They're a halftone pattern. They're dots that sort of resolve into a color when I look at them from far away. Now, something similar can happen with just sort of like basic value rendering, where, say, for example, we're looking at Superman's arm or cape here, right, where those are solid colors that are laid in. Those aren't dot patterns, but you can actually overlay a dot pattern on top of them to kind of render it as a value. So let's pull out and talk about maybe where we're going with this project. We're going to eventually take this into Illustrator, and we're going to do the same kind of stuff. So for example, in this image, I have those three layers I was just talking about. I have, I'm going to double click him open. I have the flat and the key image. See, these are all stacked in, so I might as well just kind of pull them out like this. The flat, the key image, and the halftone all kind of like layering on top of each other. Now, that's exactly the same way those comic books are built, and this is what we're going to go into Photoshop to isolate. So, let's go to Photoshop and pull your image up. I'm going to throw out these layers here because they're not necessary for our demo. I'll start from scratch. The very first thing you'll do is go to Image, Image Mode, Grayscale. There are a lot of ways to turn your image to black and white in Photoshop, but this one's pretty critical. We have to throw out the color information to make this happen. Now, all of the edits we're going to do in Photoshop are what are called destructive photo edits, and so we need to do a Command J, duplicate the background layer, because we're going to apply maybe 3 or 4 different edits to each photo layer, and I want a fresh photograph for each edit. If you don't have your layers palette open, go to Window, Layers. If you have too many palettes open, you can feel free to close some of them down. You're going to need to be able to see 3 or 4 layers all at the same time, so make sure your palette is stretched out enough to see that. The first edit that we're going to do, or the first effect we're going to apply, is underneath Filter, Filter Gallery. Now inside the Filter Gallery, you get this whole kind of window full of kind of exciting different things to play with. I'm going to close down my artistic palette for a minute, open up Sketch, and click Photocopy. Now you should see a preview render over here on the left. It can be a little RAM intensive, so your computer may kind of chew on that a little bit slowly, but be patient with it. Now this is what we're going to use to isolate out this hard black edge, or what we'll call the key image from your photograph. It doesn't have to perfectly describe every single detail in your subject, but it should describe some important details, like in my situation, the rim of a glasses, or the move of some lips, or the shape of a nose. If it doesn't quite do that yet, go ahead and increase or decrease the amount of detail it captures, or increase or decrease the amount of darkness. What you're looking for is a nice hard black edge, like what I've got here. We'll click OK. I'm going to leave that layer alone for a minute. Just turn the eyeball off on the left, go back to the photographic image, and do another Command J, duplicate. I'm going to go back up to my filter layer, and this time I'll be looking for Pixelate, Color, Halftone. Now in the halftone options, the only number we're going to manipulate here is the max radius. I'm just going to choose the one that's already preset here, 20 pixels for me, and click OK to give you an idea of what this is going to look like. Now, as soon as I assign that color halftone, it re-renders my photographic image as a dot pattern, and the dot pattern is just circles, right? So if I go quickly turn off that layer and go back to the photograph, you can see the difference between that photographic resolution of 256 grays, and the halftone pattern, which will shift depending on how large the radius is. I'm going to Command Z that effect for a second, go back in and show you two other pixel radiuses to give you a sense of how this can change. I'm going to choose a really small pixel radius, like 6 pixels, and render that one. Now that almost looks photographic, very much like, say, a photographic print in a newspaper. When I zoom in, though, it's still just those black dots. It's not any gray or anything in there, but it definitely kind of renders the appearance of gray just by putting those dots closer together or farther apart. If I edit undo that one more time, go to Filter, Pixelate, Color Halftone, and manipulate that. Oops, let me try that again. Color Halftone, there we go. And put this in just kind of a huge direction, 50 pixels, you'll see that I nearly blow out any recognizable qualities to this photograph. So what you have to do, depending on the resolution of your photograph, is find a number that works to give you something kind of right down the middle. Not too photographic, but also not so bad that it blows out all the detail at all. This one to me feels sort of illustrative, so I'm going to go with it. That was 20 pixels in my case. Now I'm going to leave this layer alone for a minute, come back to my photo layer, and do a Command J one more time. Filter, Filter Gallery for one more visit. Now, photocopy was stored underneath the sketch portfolio. Let's go all the way back up to Artistic and Cutout. Now inside Cutout, you'll see that it re-renders this photograph in a much simpler grayscale gamut. If you come over to the options on the right hand side, you see that this is a 5 grays. It's like the gamut is only 5 different grays. So if I decrease that to say 3, now you can only see white, gray, and black. So that's 3 levels. If I increase that dramatically, right, I get a little bit higher resolution grayscale image. Now what are we looking for here? I want to be able to isolate just the shadow areas in my photograph. So 8 levels feels a little bit too much because it really breaks up my shadows into too many layers. So I'm going to come back down to 4. Okay, we're getting somewhere. I have a sort of a shadow in the neck here and in the chin. Maybe I'll bump that up to 5. Alright, this is what I'm looking for. So I've got this shadow that sort of snakes up through the center of my subject's face here and kind of follows his hairline. What I want is a shadow that is going to be descriptive of the dark areas on his face. If your subject was lit from one direction, this will typically be 1/2 of your subject's face. My subject was lighted from 2 directions, and so the shadow sort of moves up through the center of his face. I'll click OK, and now from here on out I'll be doing some selection work in Photoshop. Maybe the easiest layer to talk about selections with would be the key image. So let's come up and do that one. In the meantime, I'm going to turn off all these other layers so that it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. If I'm selected on that key image layer, I can come to Select, Color Range, and what I want to do inside Color Range is I want to isolate just that black line that I had. If your computer doesn't quite look like mine, come down here to Selection Preview and select Quick Mask. What Quick Mask will show you is if I say click on the frame of his glasses with my eyedropper tool, it automatically defaults to that tool. The red shows me everything that is not selected, and in this case the black is everything that is selected. The big idea here is that I would like to isolate that nice hard black line. That looks pretty good, but I would like to get just a little bit more of the black line between my subject's lips here, so I'm going to hold Shift and add to my selection. There we go. So I got a bit more, and over here in my selection preview window I can kind of get a sense for what my selection is grabbing onto. Here's how that's going to look though. I'm going to click OK, accept that selection, and now I've got this kind of marching ants scrolling marquee around all those black shapes. I'm going to zoom out and copy and paste that selection into a new layer. Keyboard shortcut for that is Command C, Command V. Copy paste. Now if I turn off the photocopy effect layer, you'll see what I pasted. It's just those hard black lines on the outside of my subject. Because my photocopy layer is no longer needed, I'll take that layer and throw it in the trash, and double click this layer and rename it key. That's my key image. Alright, so let's turn my attention to the halftone layer. What I want to use my halftone layer for is to only fill the shadows of my subject. To do that, I need to generate a selection that I can use as a cut path, or in Photoshop what they call a layer mask. So this layer, my cutout layer, I'm going to use to select just those shadow areas. So I'll select on my cutout effect layer, go to selection, color range, and this time I'll be grabbing onto just the dark layers. So I've got these two grays, kind of a medium gray and a dark gray. I'll hold shift to select them both, click OK, but instead of copy and pasting those layers, I'm going to use them as a layer mask. So I'll go to my halftone layer, turn it back on, make sure I'm selected on that layer, come down to the bottom of my layers palette, and click the icon that says Add Layer Mask. It's a square with a circle in it. As long as that selection was still active when I clicked Add Layer Mask, you can see it pop up right here in a layer mask right next to the halftone pattern. If I turn off my cut layer here, you can see what happened. The layer mask performs a cut on my halftone pattern and renders everything else as transparent. In Photoshop, this little gray and white checkerboard that shows up behind something proves me or tells me that it's a transparent background, or in other words, clear. Now here's what I can do with that. With a clear background, if my key image also has a clear background, I can use them and stack them on top of each other and see them at the same time. It's pretty cool. Alright, so since this layer I no longer need, I'm going to drag that to the trash, and I'll double click my halftone layer and rename that layer halftone. And I'm almost there. All I need now is one more flat that's like a silhouette around the outside of my subject. I'll come to my photo layer and Command J, duplicate, and I'll come to filter. No, actually I don't think I'm going to use filter this time. I think I'll use a simpler one, something we learned at the very beginning of the semester. I'll click the half black, half white circle, scroll all the way down to threshold. Now threshold is kind of like the cut path. It's just that it's only going to give me two values, pure black, pure white, but I can move this slider around and decide how much detail in the image I'm going to capture. Now I don't want any of this cloudy sky stuff coming in. All I want is as close to a silhouette as I can get on my subject. And in this case I kind of want to have the edge of his glasses defined really well, so I'll just kind of move that slider down. It doesn't really matter to me that I'm getting a little bit of highlight in here. Those were really, really bright areas of the photograph. So I'll close that down. And now this threshold layer comes in as an adjustment, not an effect layer like these other ones. And so I have to do a step that merges it with the layer underneath. So I'll hold Shift and grab both those layers, right click, scroll all the way down to the bottom of that right-click palette where it says Merge Layers. Now I have all the pieces I need. The background flat, the halftone pattern, and the key image. Now the only thing I may have to do yet is remove any remaining white space. So let me zoom in on my halftone pattern. Yep, I have white in between my halftone dots. So I'm going to select on my halftone image, go to Select, Color Range, and grab onto just the white space, click OK, and tap Delete. Command D deselects from that white space, and now let me check my thresholded layer. Yep, lots of white space in here, so I'll go to Select, Color Range, grab onto just that white space, and click OK. Tap Delete. Oop, I was selected on the wrong layer. Make sure I'm selected on the threshold layer. Tap Delete and Command D, deselect. Now because I accidentally tapped Delete on my other layer, I better make sure I didn't do any damage to it. Nope, still looks okay. So now when I select each one of these layers, they should stack on top of each other. Now my threshold layer is black, totally black, so this is going to look a little strange now, but that'll be where the fun comes in Illustrator. The last step I need to do here in Photoshop would be to save out each one of these layers as its own file. So if I go to File, Save As, I would name each one of these layers after what it is. So in this case, I'm looking at my key image. Let me double check that. Yep, looking at my key image, so I'll rename it Key 1 maybe. And I'll go to my JPEG format, click Save, and I'll make sure that I save it as the largest possible JPEG compression. Now I'll turn off the key image, turn on my halftone image, do a File, Save As, and this one is halftone. Call it Halftone 2. Switch my format to a JPEG. Click OK. And this last step, I'll do a File, Save As, and I'll name this one Flat. Change the format to a JPEG and click Save. Click OK, and the rest of the work will be done in Illustrator.